Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein. We've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson &
Donald
Johnson.
Trump thinks that his job as president of the United States is to be reality TV show, game show host in chief. And he'll gather a few people around him as props and let them come out and say a few words, but he's going to be the star of the show. And no more Mike Pence, and weirdly, no more CDC. The director of the CDC, Robert Redfield, and Ann Schauschat, S-C-H-U-C-H-A-T, I think it's Schauschat, the principal deputy director, who have been behind that presidential podium all the way back to the mid-2000s, including the 2009 influenza pandemic. They're no longer showing up. This has just turned into a PR operation, Trump's things. So forget about Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Andrew Cuomo is now the acting president of the United States. Trump continues to think that, his job is reality show chief, moderator-in-chief. Cuomo, on the other hand, the governor of New York State and a former member, he was the HUD secretary for Bill Clinton back in the 90s. He was a member of Bill Clinton's cabinet. He's been in the Situation Room. He's been in these cabinet room meetings. Has been doing a morning update every day this week with facts, figures, and reassuring stories about his own family. He had his daughter on next to him today. 6 feet away, but his daughter was on next to him. And he's been showing us what humanity, decency, and competency look like. CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News are carrying Cuomo's morning updates live nationwide. Finally, Fox News has decided, well, maybe there's something to this stuff. Now that America has figured out that not only has Trump been lying to them for years, to us for years, but the Republican Party and their trickle-down economics thing has been a scam for the last 40 years. The country is basically turning its back on Trump. He goes on TV and talks and the stock market goes down. America now gets it. In Brazil, the people are demanding that right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro step down because he did the same thing Trump has done in failing to prepare for a crisis that was obviously coming and then lying to his people about it for months. And soon we'll see demands that Trump step down and let somebody who actually knows how to run a government replace him, and it can't come fast enough. And if you want to see that little rant that I just shared with you, it's over at buzzflash.com and on our Facebook page. But, just to elaborate, people are in Brazil, they're sheltered in place, right? You can't go out. Well, you can. It's voluntary confinement. But what's happening is millions of people in Sao Paulo, the capital, and Rio de Janeiro, the largest city, took to their balconies and windows to demand Bolsonaro's ouster over his handling of the COVID-19 outbreak. The massive protest kicked off mid-afternoon yesterday as Bolsonaro was on TV. Bolsonaro, who just last week said that the whole thing was a fantasy. This virus epidemic, it's a fantasy. Right. Another story here about the CDC has been sidelined, and they're no longer doing briefings to the public. Now, they're doing briefings to public health authorities, but not to the public. Robert Redfield and Ann Shushat, the comment that was made. This was to the Washington Post. This is from a report from the Washington Post. Quote, ever since Mike Pence's team took over the response, they have treated the outbreak as a public relations crisis. Well, that's what it is. These guys, there's no way these guys stay in office. Meanwhile, NPR this morning was playing a recording from 3 friggin' weeks ago of North Carolina Republican Senator Richard Burr telling an audience of, it was a business group, right? So these are presumably wealthy donors, that this thing is going to get really bad really fast. Get ready. It was described by NPR as a dire warning about the coronavirus. 3 weeks ago, this was at a luncheon in Washington, D.C., of a group of businessmen and women, presumably, from North Carolina called the Tar Heel Circle. Now, Burr was not saying the same thing to his constituents. He wasn't saying the same thing to you and me and the people of North Carolina. Meanwhile, Trump just tweeted out, or yesterday afternoon, he tweeted out, I only signed the Defense Production Act to combat the Chinese virus should we need to invoke it in a worst-case scenario in the future. Hopefully there will be no need, but we are all in this together. In other words, first of all, Democrats in Congress have been saying, Trump, invoke the Defense Production Act, so that the federal government can say to individual factories, you will make ventilators and we will make you whole if you lose money doing it. So just go ahead and do it and don't worry, man the torpedoes and whatever the phrase is, right? But now Trump is saying, I signed that, but I'm not going to actually do it. And Elizabeth Warren is saying, President Trump, are your eyes stitched shut? Hospitals need test kits, ventilators, and other medical supplies. That's why the Defense Production Act exists. Stop dragging your feet and burying your head and start helping hospitals that are about to be slammed by this pandemic. That was yesterday. This morning on CNN, just before President Andrew Cuomo addressed the nation on all 3 cable networks, and I don't know if he was on NBC, ABC, or CBS. I doubt it, but who knows? But just before that, on CNN, Poppy Harlow was interviewing people. Mass General Hospital has run out of masks. They have no they've basically wiped out their supply of personal protective gear. I mean, this has reached the levels of, what would you call it? A genuine crisis. How about that? Yes, that is where it's at right now. And Trump is going on TV blithering and talking about what a wonderful job he's doing and all his people and this, that, and the other thing. And it's just amazing. What are you doing to keep up while you're sheltering in place? Do you have suggestions? Do you have thoughts? I'd rather not hear any more stories about, coughing and pooping and stuff like we heard yesterday. I'm going to start canceling those. And people in despair, I get it. A lot of us are freaked out. But that's not going to help anybody. And I don't want to make this show into Freak Out Central. I don't think it's a good thing for the show. I don't think it's good for you. I don't think it's good for me. So, let's start out today with, what can we do to help each other out? How can we be here for each other? What are you doing with your family? I have 3 brothers, 3 younger brothers. And, we typically only talk once a year or so. It's not like we don't like each other. We've just lived, largely separate lives for decades. Louise and I left Michigan, and a couple of my brothers get together from time to time. Another one lives quite a ways away and doesn't so much. But last night I sent a text message to all 3 of them just saying, hey, how are you? Checking in with your family. And one of them called me back and told me that his son just got laid off, but his other child is still working, and about what was going on with him. He's concerned about his job. I got a text message from one of my other brothers this morning. He's a little older. He's retired. He's on Social Security, talking about how he and his wife are sheltering in place. She's telecommuting now. So, it's like trying to take my own advice from yesterday about reaching out to people and connecting with each other. So, anyhow.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I've got a little more news I want to run through with you, both economic and political. We kind of started with the political. And then I'll be picking up your phone calls. Richard Wolff will be with us today, by the way. Thank you. Ron in Penn, New York. Hey, Ron, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Well, thanks for having me on, Tom. I got watching TV this morning and come across a sporting event going around out there in the world. Down in Australia, they opened their season for their Australian rules football. And if you know anything about Australian rules football, there's about 40 people on the field at the same time, players. Then there's
I've watched it. It's insane.
Yeah, like 6 officials, and then you have the guys around the sidelines. And when they kick a goal, some of these guys are wearing mouthpieces. They take them out, put them down their sock, and then they put them back in their mouth, and then they go keep playing the game. They aren't washing their hands. Get me? They're touching the ball and stuff. So they don't seem to.
Were there fans in the stands?
No, there's an 85,000 seat stadium, and there was no fans in the stands. They did do that.
I'm guessing it's just gonna be a matter of a week or so before some professional football player. They call it football. We call it soccer. Well, actually, they've got their own version. Australian has Australian rules are different than the rest of the world. Yeah, it's a very very aggressive game. It's amazing. But I'm guessing it's just going to be a matter of a few days to a week, probably at the most, between now and the time that the Australians are saying, "Wait a minute, we gotta cancel this stuff." Thanks a lot for the call, Ron. That's a good one. David in Spotwood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to comment that the seeds of this crisis was sowed in the 2008 financial crisis. Right. All the governors and states, including Governor Cuomo, put caps on the property tax cap. Now, that might seem innocuous at first, but it causes the banksters to be able to leverage higher housing values because the property taxes are down, and it also put more pressure on sales tax receipts. So now, in this crisis, we're left with higher house values that have to come down, higher housing costs, and states that are impacted by lower sales tax receipts, well, they have to deal with the coronavirus crisis. So long story short, the wrong message was sent, the wrong measures were taken, and now it's going to help exacerbate this crisis. That's why I'm calling in.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, David. In their defense, I don't think they were anticipating in their defense, I don't think they were anticipating a worldwide pandemic. But that said, there was a lot of stuff that could have been done in 2008 by George Bush and in 2009 by Barack Obama that wasn't. And it wasn't done because Bush and the Republicans were unwilling to do it in 2008, and because in 2009, Obama would not have been able to get it past Republicans in the Senate. And, that includes putting Glass-Steagall back into place and breaking up the big banks, Trump just did away with, or the Fed just did away with the reserve requirements for banks yesterday. So now banks can behave in as risky a fashion as they want. And, our only defense now is the U.S., what is it called? I forget the name of it. But in any case, you know what I'm talking about. It's the program that protects you up to $250,000 with your bank. FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That's basically all we've got left. We'll be back. Stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We want to run through some of the news here of the day for you, and then we'll pick up your phone calls right after the break. Starting with, there's a great summary in the Axios newsletter today, Mike Allen's newsletter. He says it's no longer that this could be bad for the economy. The layoffs are starting. He said we're heading toward a $2 trillion deficit, invoking wartime powers, although Trump, while he signed the act and bragged about it on television yesterday, has yet to use it. So he has not directed any factories to start making masks. He hasn't. There's a 3M factory in Minnesota that makes masks. He hasn't said, hey, start making more. You know, it's just, and I'm going to get to ventilators in a minute. Shocking news on the ventilator front. But widespread economic destruction. This from the Oregonian today, our local newspaper owned by a New York company. Oregon jobless claims surge 3,200%. You heard that right. Not 3%, 3,200%. The state's unemployment, an Oregon business leader predicted the state's unemployment rate could rise as high as 20% next month or the month after, and that nearly 500,000 people in Oregon will be looking for work. I think the population of our state is between 3 and 4 million. On Tuesday alone, now keep in mind, the average number of claims at the Oregon unemployment system, and we're just one little state, and we are not an epicenter of a major, we had 10 new cases last night. I think we're up to something like 70 here in Oregon. I mean, we're not New York or Washington State. We're just a little state, and we're just having little outbreaks. We average 570 claims a day, and Tuesday, 18,500 people in Oregon filed for unemployment insurance. Tuesday. Yesterday was Wednesday, but we get the statistics a day later. So back to Axios, he's talking about hospitals and government agencies are trying to throw enough medical supplies together. Hospitals are postponing elective procedures, even organ transplants. NYU, New York University, is now vacant dorms, could be turned into hospital rooms. The governor and the mayor are looking at this. Cities are looking at motels, vacant buildings, even RVs for quarantine sites. Trump, calling himself a wartime president, freed up military manufacturing tools. Well, yes, but no, he's not using them. It's just cosmetic. So then the economic crisis is going on. In phase one of the crisis, share prices sink. Of course, that's happening. Louise thinks the Dow is going to get to 15,000. I think it's going to get to 6,000, which is where it was in 2008. But who knows? I mean, we'll see. They've got this $1 trillion. First, there was the $840 million plan that the Democrats passed through the House, went to the Senate, and they said, okay, $840 million would do that. They're working on a second one, $1 trillion plan. This is the one that has a $1,000 or $2,000 check for everyone. We don't know yet. About half the money is going to go to needy Americans. The other half of the $1 trillion goes to billionaires and big corporations. Probably a few hundred corporations and a few thousand billionaires. But the working class is facing a very, very real recession. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, bankers and traders are trying to sell everything that's not nailed down. J.P. Morgan issued their expectations. It was a research note yesterday titled "The Day the Earth Stood Still." And they're saying in the second quarter, now January, February, March are the first quarter, so the second quarter starts in about a week and a half. And they're saying the second quarter you're going to see a contraction of the U.S. GDP by 14%, 22% the Eurozone. I think those are very conservative numbers. The most dire warning came from Pershing Square Capital Management CEO Bill Ackman, who went on CNBC to beg President Trump. He said, until a vaccine is manufactured, distributed, and injected, we will go through a Depression-era period in this country. And I believe he's the CEO. I saw this on the CNBC, on a CNBC story this morning, but I don't have it right in front of me, who actually started crying on the air. One of the giant hedge fund or investment fund owners, billionaire guys, was on CNBC yesterday crying about this. It harkens back to 1929, 1930, when you had stories of bankers jumping out of buildings. We're learning now that in the United States, the statistics that we saw coming out of China don't seem to be holding up in the United States. We seem to have a very different patient profile. This is probably because China started aggressive testing of people back in December. And South Korea started aggressive testing of people in January. We have not yet begun aggressive testing of people. By aggressive, I mean like pretty much anybody who wants it, anybody who's sick, all of their contacts, everybody, right? This is how Singapore is not seeing new cases. China is not seeing new cases. They've got this under control. Japan and South Korea are seeing very, very small increases in new cases, 70, 80 new cases a day. That's it. Because they know who's sick and who's not, and they've got them locked down because they have distributed hundreds of thousands of tests throughout the country. But the patient profile in the United States, 38% of the patients who were so severely sick that they needed to be hospitalized were between 20 and 54 years old. And nearly half of the patients who were admitted to ICU units in the New York hospitals, this is from the New York Times by Pam Bullock, nearly half of the patients admitted to ICUs in New York are under 65. And then they tell this tragic story about Grace Fusco, 73, died in a Jersey hospital hours after her son died in Pennsylvania, 5 days after their eldest child, Rita Jackson, 55, died. 4 of the children remain hospitalized. Nearly 20 other relatives are quarantined. I mean, these are the kind of stories we're going to start seeing. We just need to get ready for it. And we need to figure out ways to get more tests out. And or Donald Trump needs to figure out a way to get more tests out. And, governors are scrambling, hospitals are running out of supplies. This is a crisis that is here in the United States. It is not a crisis right now in Singapore. In Singapore, people are back to work. Because in Singapore, they planned for it. They were ready for it. They had the SARS thing that ran through Singapore, and they built out the infrastructure for it. When that happened, Obama started building the infrastructure at the Department of Homeland Security and the National Security Council. Trump fired them all 2 years ago.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll tell you about the ventilators. Well, I've got the ventilators and a bunch of other stories. This special report on how Korea did. We'll pick this up in the next or the third hour of the program. We'll get back to that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book club selection today is... Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine. And Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang-raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked: agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. An average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation, and the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called Home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, what's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Melinda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Karen in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well. I hope you are
Oh,
too.
thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to talk enough to just for you to hear my head rattle. But what I wanted to ask is, have you heard anything about if people who are on Social Security will be eligible for the so-called checks they're going to send out?
We don't know yet, Karen, because the legislation hasn't been completed. They're still negotiating that in the Senate, and it has not yet gone to the House. What they're talking about is a $1,000 check to everybody, and then they're adding another $1,000 check to it. And one of the proposals that I saw was $1,000 to everybody to all adults and $500 to every kid. But right now we don't know. But what I can tell you, and thank you for the call, Karen, I think it should. I think it should go to every single person in America. And then people say, well, what about the billionaires? Well, there's only a few thousand billionaires, They can get a $1,000 check too. The problem is trying to filter out the billionaires, or even trying to filter out the millionaires, people who are in the top 1%. There's a couple 100,000 of them. Trying to filter them out will take months. It slows the process down, whereas sending a check to absolutely everyone, that's pretty fast. But here, let me just give you yesterday. This was yesterday in the United States Senate. The House is home right now. The United States Senate, because they worked until 11 o'clock Friday night, but the Senate is still meeting. Two members of the House, by the way, a Democrat and a Republican. A Republican from Utah, as I recall, and a Democrat from, I don't have it in front of me, but anyhow, they have tested positive. And so now their staff, and they were hanging out with their peers, with their colleagues, just last week in the House of Representatives. So this might be ripping through the House of Representatives fairly soon. Hopefully not, but we'll see. But my guess is that they're going to very quickly figure out how to vote from home and work from home. This is a crisis. But yesterday in the Senate, as they were negotiating these packages that you just asked about, Patty, and this was this $1 trillion thing, Senator Patty Murray of Washington State, Patty Murray, the one who sent the letter back in February, I believe it was, to Trump and Pence and the head of CDC and whatnot, saying, why are we not buying, and why have we not, since January when they were available, been buying test kits from this German manufacturer that was authorized by the World Health Organization. And now there's a dozen manufacturers around the world who have been licensed by the World Health Organization to make these test kits. So they're available widely. Why are we not buying them from them? Why did we choose never to do that? And she still has not gotten an answer to that question. But anyhow, Patty Murray proposed an amendment, or an amendment to this bipartisan relief package that they're working out in the Senate right now, that they're debating right now. And her amendment would have given 2 weeks of paid sick leave, as much as 12 weeks of paid sick leave, 2 weeks of paid sick leave, and 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, which would be like, if somebody gets sick in your family, you've got a shelter in place, or you've got to self-quarantine, 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, 2 weeks of paid sick leave. This is nothing, right? In Germany, you get 50 weeks of paid sick leave. She proposed 2 weeks of paid sick leave, 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, and all 51 Republican senators who were there voted against it. The only two Republican senators who did not vote against it, Cory Gardner and Rick Scott, didn't vote at all because they weren't there when the vote happened. So that got defeated. And meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin told Republican lawmakers during a closed-door meeting yesterday or the day before, avoid using the provocative word bailout. And one senator said, well, why don't we call them freedom payments? And much jocularity, much laughter ensued. Bizarre. Uli in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Uli, what's up?
Hello, Tom. First-time caller.
Well, thank you.
Just an observation. The township I live in, I noticed when I go to stores, people do not really take this serious. That's my observation. If you compare this, I understand you speak German.
Ein bisschen.
Ambition, okay. I suggest you look at das erste Mediathek, das zweite Mediathek. There's some great programs. Also, you can Also, you can watch Angela Merkel's addressing the nation last night, and you will see the difference between her and Trump. And there's some
I
great
saw
programs
clips of
about
that.
China. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I saw clips of that. She was very sober, very serious. I mean, you know, she's got a PhD in physics. This is a woman who understands science. And Donald Trump has a PhD in stupid. But anyhow, back to you, Uli.
Anyway, there's also, I saw one program on China. Excuse me. And it was about Beijing. Everybody's required to wear a mask. Everybody. And you see pictures of it. Everybody's, I mean, very organized the way they operate now.
Well, and they have enough masks because they ramped up production as soon as they realized they had a problem. Whereas here in the United States, you know, Trump literally tweeted out a picture of himself playing the violin, fiddling, about a week ago. He literally tweeted that out. And it's like, you know, apparently he wasn't in history class the day that they talked about Nero fiddling while Rome burned.
Right. Anyway, the way I look at it, people in this country have not come to the point yet that they take this serious.
I think probably what you're seeing, I get it, Uli, and you know, there was just 3 days ago, a survey was published, which was probably a day or two old, of Fox News viewers, and only 38% of them thought the coronavirus was a real problem. And, you know, whereas it was like 70 to 80% of people who watch CNN or MSNBC, and I'm sure that those numbers are close to 100% now. Fox News is actually starting to carry this stuff. They carried Andrew Cuomo's address this morning to New York State. Like I said, I think he's now our functional president, at least in terms of leadership on this, and a place to get real information. He's giving real numbers and doing real science and stuff. And it's going to, you know, my prediction, in fact, is that probably tomorrow or maybe next week, Donald Trump is going to start speaking at the same time Andrew Cuomo does. And the networks are going to have to decide, do we take the buffoon or do we take the actual facts? And that's going to be real interesting. You know, this is, what I was saying is, I think that the people you're seeing in the stores are probably the people who've been watching Fox News and listening to Rush Limbaugh for weeks tell everybody that this was just a Democratic hoax. He says Democrat hoax. Democratic hoax to take down the president politically. And so, you know, they're not taking it seriously. I mean, you know, I know some of these folks, and as of 3 days ago, they were still partying together and hanging out. And, you know, they're going to, you know, this is going to burn right through them. That's kind of the bad news. Uli, thank you for the call. I got to move along, but that's kind of the bad news. The maybe good news on the back end of this, you know, Boris Johnson's health advisor, his health secretary, I believe is the title, had said last week, let's not do anything. Let's just let this thing burn through the population of the United Kingdom, and we will have herd immunity when it's done. And then somebody sat him down and showed him the numbers and showed him the hospital capacity in the UK, and he freaked out and changed his tune. As far as I can tell, he changed his tune the day before Donald Trump changed his tune. And you'll recall, Trump hadn't barred flights from the UK either. So I think that Trump and Boris Johnson have been talking and on the same page pretty much, and now they're both freaked out. Way too late for either country. But where I was going with this is that after, you know, George Washington had smallpox. You don't see it in the paintings, but he had pox marks on his face. Smallpox were not uncommon back then, and having those marks on your face actually made you more employable if you were a young man back then, because they knew that you weren't going to get sick. Now, this disease does not leave a mark, but there are tests for it to show if you've had it. And, well, actually, there are tests to show if you've had it available in Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and China, not in the United States, because we've got this guy in the White House. But when those tests become available, or when people can simply show, yes, I was hospitalized, or yes, I was diagnosed, and now I'm clean, those are going to be the first people who are going to be brought back to work. You know, particularly in critical industries, and they're going to have great job opportunities in things like being, you know, like linemen for utilities and working with cable companies and doing, going into homes and installing telephone systems and doing repair. And I mean, there's the post economy, and it's probably going to start in a few months as people start recovering from this. And a lot of those people are going to be people who were the Fox News viewers. I mean, it's kind of ironic because they got themselves infected. sadly, a lot of them will have died. The story of this entire family that just almost got wiped out that I told you from Axios. I mean, it's going to be a tragedy, and a lot of these people are going to be, have injured lungs for the rest of their lives. And the rest of us who are like sheltering in place and trying not to get sick, we're waiting for the drugs to come along that are now available in Japan, South Korea, and China to treat this, and widespread testing. And a vaccine, they're being tested now.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The rest of us will be going back into the workforce, 6 months, a year and a half down the road. And we need to provide for all that. But there's going to be a real interesting dynamic here, sort of like we saw during the Black Plague. Thank you. Tom in Arlington, Washington. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Thank you, Tom, for all you do. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay.
What's up?
So, Bernie was doing pretty good until the corporate-owned media, started referring to him as a socialist, and, the next thing would be the communist. But the fact of the matter is we've been living in a socialized country for a number of years as we've seen all of profits being privatized and the debt being socialized. And you can call it Republican socialism or establishment politician socialism. But we see it in our schools, we see it in the prisons. We bailed out the banks and paid for it, socialize that debt with our homes and our money. The health care system is a perfect example of what I would refer to as Republican socialism or establishment politician socialism, where the profits are privatized and we socialize the debt. Now, Tom, they're doing it with the virus.
Well, this is the essence of my rant about the ventilators. It turns out that there's a lot of ventilators available right now. They're not having a shortage of ventilators in Europe. They're having a shortage of hospital beds to deal with them. But there's a German company that's willing to sell ventilators. There are American companies who can sell more ventilators. The problem is the for-profit hospital chains are not willing to buy them because they're concerned that this is a short-term crisis.
Well,
this is reporting from the Washington Post.
If there was ever a case for a realignment of things in this country, this should be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, absolutely. The headline, the article is by Christopher Rowland, and I'm going to do an in-depth, deep dive into it later on in the program. But the headline is, "More life-saving ventilators are available. Hospitals can't afford them." And by can't afford, I mean hospitals, they can afford whatever they want. They're choosing not to buy them because they're saying this may be a short-term thing, and we don't want to harm hospital corporate profits. This is the stuff that makes you pull your hair out. It's just nuts. Yep, I'm with you, Tom. Thank you. You summed it up very nicely. Paula in Seattle. Hey, Paula. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I think this would be an opportunity for us with this economy. If we have all this money to bail out the airlines and the cruise ships, why don't we pour that money into green industries and high-speed rail, which would employ a lot of people and help our climate crisis? It seems like a golden opportunity.
Yes, there's going to be a pause here, and it's going to last between 6 months and 2 years, where the economy basically shuts down, and we need to get everybody through this, and we need to keep our infrastructure, including our economic infrastructure, intact through this. And that's going to be a real challenge. It's going to require real leadership, which worries me, given who's in the White House. But after that, we're going to get back to normal, and it's going to be, like after the smallpox vaccine was developed. We're going to get back to normal. We're going to figure out how to deal with this thing, and when we get back to normal, there's going to be an explosion of activity, and hopefully there will be a Democrat in the White House, and then what you're talking about, Paula, comes into play. It comes into play in a big way. Paula, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around if you're over there. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Merrick in West Hills, California. Hey, Merrick, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for all you do. I wonder if anybody is aware or you're aware of the fact that in October of 2019, there was a tabletop mock pandemic at Johns Hopkins University that was labeled the coronavirus mock pandemic. And there they had all kind of predictions. But if we had that kind of foreknowledge that this was occurring and our government took place, Big Pharma, government, WHO, NIH, all took place in this tabletop mock pandemic. If we had that much forenotice that there was an impending pandemic, we should have been way prepared. And the fact that we are not using WHO test kits is a travesty, and it shows that we are under the thumb of disaster capitalism, where corporations and Big Pharma are trying to gain,
right.
Trying to profit.
Gain profits. That's what they're trying to do, Merrick. Yeah, spot on. And here's the thing: we shouldn't. And Merrick, thank you. Your point is really well made, and it's an important one. And let me take it to the next step. This was, I'm not familiar with this particular tabletop thing, but that they would do it with a coronavirus, that whole family of viruses. That's where SARS is. That's where MERS is. MERS is the camel virus. It's got a 40% fatality rate that's in the Middle East right now. SARS is the one that we stopped back in, I think it was 2009. It might have been earlier than that. Maybe it was 2003. The one that came out of, again, bats out of Asia. And by the way, Trump keeps saying this is a Chinese virus. It came from China. No, it came from bats, you idiot. They just happened to be in China. But in any case, after those two coronavirus crises, particularly after the second one, and the H1N1 flu, the possibility that we were going to have a flu pandemic. This was in 2009 when President Obama was president, his first year. We were looking at a flu pandemic that might kill millions, just like it did back in 1919. And Obama put together two pandemic response teams that would have to do with national security. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with foreign countries? What are all the political and logistical things? And that was over in the National Security Council. And the second one that would coordinate the activities of our health agencies, that would coordinate the activities of our police agencies who may have to enforce things like quarantines, and that would work with hospitals and research agencies and bring in the CDC. That one was over in the Department of Homeland Security. We had these two teams in place. Obama put them in place in 2009. Donald Trump gets elected in 2016. He gets sworn in 2017. A year later it was later in 2017. That year, on the advice from one of these right-wing think tanks funded by right-wing billionaires, Donald Trump disbanded both of those agencies and fired all their staffers. Now, what those agencies did on an ongoing basis with their government paychecks that the right-wing billionaires thought was a waste of their tax dollars, what these agencies did with this was they did just exactly what you just described. They would strategize, they would plan, they would have regular exercises out in the field. There was also, and Richard Trumka pointed this out, and this was insane. Richard Trumka pointed this out yesterday on CNN. The president of the AFL-CIO, that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration had guidelines that were put into place by the Obama administration, and last year the Obama administration, that were supposed to take effect in 2017, the first year of the Trump administration, that said that every hospital in America had to have enough masks and personal protective gear to deal with a pandemic, to deal with a real crisis. And that employers, this was limited to large employers, but large employers across the United States similarly had to have pandemic planning in place and equipment for pandemics, including masks and respirators and gloves, in place. And Trump did away with these regulations, which had not yet been implemented. He was supposed to put them into place. He did away with them because he said it will cost industry and the for-profit hospital industry too much money. Honest to God. That's what Richard Trumka said yesterday on CNN. We're trying to get him on the program to give us more on the details. But I mean, this, you say, gee, you know, Johns Hopkins was doing tabletop planning on coronavirus in October of last year. Well, they were doing it because the federal government, who really should be doing it. You know, a university can't deal with a nationwide pandemic. It's something that literally requires the federal government. Andrew Cuomo made this point this morning on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC on his morning, you know, our new president of the United States, acting president of the United States, Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, he made this point this morning. He said, I used to be in Bill Clinton's cabinet. I know what, and I'm the governor of one of the largest states in the country. He said, I know what a governor can do, and I know what the federal government can do. And there are some things that he said, I can quarantine 10,000 people. Actually, he was making it, his daughter was sitting next to him. He was talking about how your kids don't always take your advice. He said, I can quarantine 10,000 people, but, you know, I can't necessarily quarantine my daughter, or words to that effect. But he said, you know, I know that there are some things that I can't do as a governor. Only the federal government can do them. I can't commandeer the Army Corps of Engineers to build a hospital facility next door to a hospital. I can't use, you know, he went through some of these powers. And tragically, the Washington Post had a piece day before yesterday about how inside the Trump administration, you've got these two teams, the Pence team and the Jared Kushner team. The Jared Kushner team, Jared's brother owns this big health insurance company and is heavily invested, which is heavily invested in by the Google company that Trump was talking about from the White House a couple of days ago. So Kushner's looking for ways to make money on this. And his brother-in-law is asking for advice on Facebook that is channeled now into the White House. And Mike Pence is dealing with it like a PR problem. But nobody's actually dealing with it like a government problem. Trump comes out and says the right words. Oh, it's a whole government response. BS. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm
We say fight back!
Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Health care is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So as the economy falls through the floor, let's check in with a real economist on this. Congressman. Professor Richard Wolff is on the line with us. He is an economist, a professor of economics, co-founder of Democracy at Work. Democracyatwork.info is the website. His personal website, rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf with 2 Fs. He's the author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I don't have a lot of very specific questions for you. I would love to hear your thoughts on, number one, what the Fed is doing in relation to our entire economic system, the banking system and all this kind of thing. I mean, we've been seeing bonds behaving in ways they're not supposed to because people are dumping them so frantically to cover margin calls and things like that. I think I explained that yesterday on the air, but it's always good to revisit these kinds of things. And to what extent might the Fed be able to ameliorate some of this? And what should Congress be doing? What are your thoughts in general on all this?
Well, to be as blunt and yet to retain at least some politeness, let me say that this is the most colossal failure of a system that I have ever seen. I wasn't alive at the time of the Great Depression, so elderly folks who were might correct me on this. The fundamental reality is this. There was no planning for this catastrophe, and that's a failure of our private sector, and that's a failure of the government. Because it isn't profitable for ventilator makers and test kit makers and all the other parts of the medical industrial complex, it doesn't pay them to produce goods that sit on a shelf waiting for a disaster. It doesn't pay them to stockpile those kinds of things. It doesn't pay the hospitals already squeezed in this country by Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements that are too low to maintain hospital beds in the event of this kind of a crisis. So the government didn't make sure it happened, and the private sector, driven by profitability, didn't either. And that is a mistake, and that is a failure, because we have already lost more money by this crisis than it would have cost to do all of those things. So it's not that we can't do it as a society, but we are in a society where profit is the number one item, the priority, the goal, the bottom line. And when you have that as your bottom line, public health comes a distant second, and we're now living out that contradiction. Number one. Number two, equivalent to the lack of planning in the realm of health of our people is the lack of planning of what to do in the event of the kind of emergency. Even if we were better equipped medically to deal with it, there would have had to be in place the facilities, the logic, the planning, how to cope with a crisis like this. And it's not as though we haven't had it. The Great Depression was supposed to have taught us all kinds of lessons. Even more recently, the collapse of the market in the early months of 2000 around the dot-com crash, or then again in 2008 and 9 around the second great mortgage disaster. We have had because of our capitalist system, multiple crashes. We were supposed to have learned lessons. But the real lesson that we should have learned is that if you don't fundamentally change this system, as fast as you make a reform, the interests hurt by those reforms undo them. We passed, just to take the most gross example, 1933, the Banking Act, otherwise known as Glass-Steagall. The banks didn't want it. They fought it. When they lost that battle and it got passed, they went to work. And over the intervening years, first they evaded it, then they weakened it, and under the presidency of Bill Clinton, they finally got it repealed, a repeal that Bill Clinton, and I only mention that because the Democrats are as responsible here as the Republicans, he, signed it, and so it became the law. What that was an example of the reform being undone because reforms just don't go far enough. Okay, with that background, what you're seeing now is more reforms. I can't tell you, nobody can, whether they will be sufficient. You may have noticed that we went from a few $1 billion a few days ago to now a few trillion. That gives you an idea of the out of controlness of the people we refer to as our leaders. But the reality is we don't know what to do beyond the reforms, and we're barely able to get our heads around them. And that's not because we aren't smart, and that's not because people at the top don't have brains. They do, but they are hampered by a system that focuses their attention and makes their acts work in such a way that we are in the total mess we're in now.
Yeah. Remarkable. A couple of quick points. Number one, I don't know if Joyce told you when she called you that when I'm doing the show from home like this remote, we have hard breaks at 15 minutes after. So I can't control that. The automation system will come in and step on whichever of us is talking. Okay. Secondly, I was just looking at total curative beds per 1,000 people. And China has 4.9 beds per 1,000 people. France has 4.1 beds. This is hospital beds per 1,000 people. Germany has 6.2 hospital beds per 1,000 people. Japan has 7.9 beds per 1,000 people. The United States has 2.5.
Yeah, it's beyond words. The story with the ventilators is the same. The story with the test kits. China now has a test kit that can get you the answer whether you're infected or not within a matter of, I believe, 3 hours, which is a crucial time advantage in a period of rapid spread, so we can isolate people and quarantine and prevent the spread. We don't use them. I did a tweet earlier today about how the Italian government, when it didn't get the help it wanted from the EU, turned to China. That's many, many weeks ago. Got massive help from China compared to our government, which spends its time insulting and otherwise alienating the Chinese government when we don't have comparable tests. It's stupefying, but it is, again, a consequence of a system that is simply not geared to putting the priority on the public health that the public needs and wants.
We have about a little less than a minute and a half. Yesterday, I had a congressman on, and he was talking about Congress doing a $1 or $2 trillion bailout or relief package, right, or whatever. And I had written a post for our Facebook page and for BuzzFlash.com saying that we are entering Great Depression territory. And, it took 100% of GDP to get us out of the Great Depression. We need to be looking at, over the next 12 to 18 months, a 10 to $15 trillion package to support the American people. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And the reason it makes sense is look at the, so far, two most successful responses, the Chinese and the South Korean. By the way, quite different in their ideological persuasions of their leaders and so on. They mobilized everything. They mobilized the private sector. They mobilized the public sector. They were able to do that because they don't have an ideology in either country. And whether you call this socialist, capitalist, or anything else really is now secondary. They don't have an ideology that puts the private sector in some priority position so that the government is hamstrung and cannot mobilize that part of the society, especially when that's the major part, which it is in this country. So we lack that. But that's an ideological craziness of the American society, that it has, in the name of freedom, failed to organize itself to deal with such a crisis.
Right. And we've seen I believe we went from 1.5 million hospital beds nationwide in 2000 or in the late 1980s to, we lost about 500,000 hospital beds is my record.
That's right.
Anyhow, Professor Richard Wolff.
Wasn't profitable.
That's right, exactly. Professor Richard Wolff, democracywork.info. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be right back. We'll continue with the news of the day and your calls after this. And welcome back. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Oh, sure, of course. How's it going?
Good.
Well, okay, a couple of things. If you're watching Cuomo, I've been watching Cuomo's speeches here in the New York area, and it's on the local TV stations here, but not in the Hartford area for some reason. I'm surprised they're coming that far. But as far as you mentioning the idea of staying on here, I've been doing that the last few days because I know people who are older, like an old teacher of mine I used to have, and parents or friends of mine, and they should go home safe because this is very serious for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
so you're reaching
also
out to people as something that you can do to help people during this time, and it would help you too, I would think, to be feeling good about reaching out to people.
Yeah, these are like one is a parent of a friend of mine who's here in Connecticut, and her birthday was actually yesterday, so I sang happy birthday, but then when I changed the lyric, I went, instead of the last line, I went, and there's no place to go. So got a good laugh out of that.
Yeah, good. Sean, good on you.
You know that the MTA needs $4 billion, so the crises are mounting.
That's the MTA is your mass transit system in Connecticut.
That's right. The Metro North, Long Island Railroad, the city subways and buses. Yeah, they now need $4 billion because the ridership's down like 90%.
Oh, yeah, because they're not making money. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and they may end up having an issue with their bonds. There was a thing. There's a website called Second Avenue Sagas, and there was an interview on a podcast by the guy who runs it, and they had one on Nicole Galinas, and she was talking about how they may have issues with their bonds.
Right. Yeah, and nobody is buying bonds right now. In fact, the bonds are being dumped left, right, and everywhere. Sean, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Margie in Fox Valley, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Yes, people are wondering why they're not getting their testing done. Now, my daughter works for a hospital, and yesterday there was an earthquake in Utah, a 5.5, and I guess the company that makes these analyzers, they cannot get to their warehouse right now, so it's going to take a couple more days. And when they do get the analytical analyzers, they have to certify them and calibrate them to make sure the testings are done right. But when they are ready, they will be able to do a test in 45 minutes.
Okay, that would be probably a regional situation because you've got state governors all over the country that are certifying their own labs, and they're certifying hospital labs. They're just saying to hell with the CDC and Donald Trump and all these people. We're going to do it ourselves. Washington State has done that. Oregon has done that. New York State has done that. I'm guessing probably half a dozen other states have. And then you've got, Trump, of course, handed everything over to a bunch of private companies, most notably Quest Laboratories and LabCorp. And, was that one of those two companies, Margie, that warehouse was? Or was this another company?
No.
Another one of the private
companies? This is another company.
Yeah, okay. So this isn't a massive interruption in the supply chain, but it is a consequential one for some areas. Margie, thanks for the heads up on that. That's fascinating. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes, coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from my home office here in Portland, Oregon, where Louise and I are sheltering in place. I hope you are too. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Over at the Washington Post, there is one of the more shocking stories that I've read in the last week or two as this coronavirus tragedy crisis has been sweeping across our country. At the same time, by the way, and we'll get into this in a minute. Actually, I think I'll get into this in the third hour. At the same time that South Korea, Singapore, and Japan have this largely under control. And China. China reported no new cases overnight. 0. They had 34 cases that were diagnosed overnight. Every single one of them was somebody who had arrived on a plane in the last 14 days and been under quarantine. But this story in the Washington Post just shocked me to my core. It's by Christopher Rowland, and it was published on 3/18. That's yesterday. Today is the 19th. And I'll just share pieces with you. But keep in mind what Richard Wolff just said, Professor Wolff just said. One of the reasons why hospitals don't have enough ventilators is because ventilators are expensive. They cost $25,000 to $50,000 each. Plus, there's the expense of training staff to use them. And $25,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money to me, frankly, if I was running a hospital. I mean, hospitals are multi-million-dollar operations. But when you're a for-profit company and you're rationing pencils, I mean, I have relatives who work in 2 different hospitals. They literally tell you you're using too many ballpoint pens. When you work in a company where they ration everything because the bean counters are watching over everything, because the stockholder dividends and the CEO's paycheck depends on how profitable the hospital is, then $25,000 is a hell of a lot of money. So here's this piece by Christopher Rowland in the Washington Post. He starts out, the lack of ventilators and growing calls for a more aggressive government role to fill the gap was the subject of tense exchanges this week between President Trump and state officials. The issue also revealed a disconnect between different parts of the healthcare industry, where the Maine Hospital Association disputing the accounts about the adequacy of the supply of life-saving equipment. And so they're talking about ventilators, and he says that he's quoting Chris Kipple, chief executive of Ventec Life Systems, which is a ventilator manufacturer in Washington State, just north of us. And he says it's a challenge for states, local governments, and hospital administrators to allocate tens of millions of dollars for something if they don't know if they're going to need it. And then Chris Rowland goes on in the Washington Post piece. Just listen to this. Ventilator manufacturers could achieve within a few months a significant boost in production from about 50,000 units a year currently, said Julie Lewitt, a healthcare lawyer with McGuire Woods in Chicago who is monitoring the industry. Orders have not flooded in, she said, because most hospitals can't afford. Now keep in mind, a for-profit hospital to them can't afford means we're not going to cut the CEO's pay. We're not going to reduce the dividends we pay to shareholders. Are you friggin' kidding me? Okay. Orders have not flooded in, she said, because most hospitals can't afford to increase inventory of expensive equipment for what might turn out to be a short-term event. She said, quote, the risk is that they'll never be used and hospitals can't eat the cost. Most hospitals in this country are not that profitable. And then she notes, and then they note in the article, ventilators range from $25,000 to $50,000. The article goes on, Donald Trump at a White House press briefing said, we are ordering thousands of ventilators and they are complex. Well, there's no evidence that he's actually done that. The ventilator manufacturers have not heard from him. Back to the Washington Post article. Other governments have rushed to stock up on ventilators. The United Kingdom has asked Rolls-Royce Holdings, which makes jet engines, to make ventilators. Germany ordered 10,000 ventilators from Dragerwerk AG, which Dow Jones says was the company's largest order ever. In the United States, Trump told state officials on a conference call that states and local governments should procure their own equipment. Quote, respirators, ventilators, all that equipment, try getting it yourself, end quote. Trump told the governors, according to the New York Times, which first reported the call. The Trump administration, again, this is the article from the Washington Post, the Trump administration has barely begun to release up to 13,000 older ventilator models cached around the country in the federal strategic national stockpile, saying that state officials have not requested them. Well, they probably haven't requested them because they don't know how, or they don't know that you have them, or they don't know how to get them, or the state officials can't request things on behalf of for-profit hospitals that don't want them because they're concerned about the expense. State governments don't run hospitals anymore. I told you, yesterday when I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, one of the 3 hospitals in town, St. Lawrence, was run by the Catholics. Sparrow was run by a private foundation founded by a automaker multimillionaire. And Ingham Medical was run by Ingham County, which is the county where Lansing, Michigan is. It was run by the government. There aren't any government-run hospitals, to the best of my knowledge, anymore. They've all been privatized. This was Reagan's big innovation. When Reagan came into office, hospitals were required nationwide to be nonprofit organizations, and insurance companies, health insurance companies, were required to be nonprofit organizations. Reagan blew that up, or gave the states the ability to blow that up, and state after state after state did so, and here we are. For-profit hospitals are not ordering ventilators. They're not even asking for them from the strategic stockpile. Meanwhile, Trump is going on TV saying, we're ordering thousands and thousands, lying through his teeth, according to the Washington Post. For a crisis that he could have prevented, which I'm going to lay all this out for you in the beginning of the next hour, the third hour of our program, he could have prevented if he had simply done back in January or February, or December for that matter, what South Korea was doing at the same time. Did you know that South Korea had their first patient with tested positive for coronavirus on the same day the United States did? I'll tell you all about that in the third hour. Pick up your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls. What are you doing to stay sane through this? Any suggestions, ideas? Stick with us.
Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espen: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espen.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, what's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Melinda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And a special thanks to our crew who are pitching in and working out and doing yeoman's work in a scary time. Sean in the studio and Joyce in the studio answering phones and being very, very careful and social distancing and everything else. I'm here at home. Nate is doing our video work from home, so if you're watching us on YouTube or on Free Speech TV or on Facebook Live or on Twitter, you may see glitches from now and then. And if you're listening on the radio, the audio quality is not quite what it typically is, but we're doing the absolute best that we can, and I think we're doing a pretty damn good show at that. And I just want to acknowledge everybody who's working with me and Nigel and Sue, Nigel who keeps up our website and who are working from home, and Sue Nethercutt who does our newsletter every day with a list of all the articles and every story that I've talked about during the show in it, Sue's Daily Stack, and it's free and you can find it all over ThomHartmann.com. Patrick and Jerry Lynn who put together our podcasts. We and Jamie who does our hardcore webmastering stuff. He's working from home. He's out in, I believe, Kentucky or Tennessee. But we got people scattered literally all over the globe working on this program. Nigel and Sue are in the UK. And thank you all. And thank you for listening and watching and supporting our nonprofit stations and Free Speech TV, and supporting our for-profit stations and letting their advertisers know that you're listening. We are seeing advertising dropping off rather precipitously, and it's going to be a tough time for our business, just like it is for every other business. We're going to get through this. We're doing everything we can. We may be taking some advertisers that we normally wouldn't be running, but hey. It's a pandemic, so we'll all get over that, right? We could all agree to that. So back to your calls here. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I got to tell you, I was in respiratory therapy for 40 years. I managed quite a few hospitals. You mean as a therapist? As a therapist and a manager. And what you guys are talking about today is the most frustrating part of a career I loved. At budget time, you would put in for new ventilators. And the x-rays department and all the other departments that were making money on outpatient therapies always got their equipment, and they always nixed mine. And it was like that forever and then the hospital beds, they kept dropping the number of beds. Our hometown went from 70 beds, and I think we have less than 20 now. Yeah, we've gone from, I checked the numbers, we've gone from 1.5 million beds nationally in 1990 to 1.5 million to 1 million now. Right, and they won't buy the ventilators because ventilators are not money makers. They are for critically ill patients, so they don't want to have the ventilators. I've worked in places where we've had to take patients for a 100-mile ride on an ambulance, bagging them until we can get them to another location where there was a ventilator, because we only had one. Bagging them means
you're manually blowing,
ventilating
you're squeezing
somebody.
A bag that blows air in and out of their lungs.
Until we could get them to a hospital that had more ventilators, because we only had one. Now, there was one hospital, I have to admit, that let me, for the 7.5 years I managed that department, order a fleet of ventilators. They let me order 3 1 year and 1 a year for 4 more years. And they were the only not-for-profit I had worked for in a long time. And they let me order ventilators. But
so the nonprofit hospital did it right, but the for-profit hospitals you worked for said no.
No, right. I watched a whole respiratory department turn from a beautiful 4-room department with a pulmonary function lab right next to ICU, around the corner from the emergency room. And X-ray came and said, we need that space. We're going to make money with this new equipment. And our department got thrown up to the 4th floor where they were to old patient rooms they weren't using anymore. And our cleaning area was an old bathroom. Just because they were downsizing, everything was for profit. And respiratory therapists around the country, I have to shout out to you guys. You are in the front lines no matter where they need somebody critically. Babies, adults, ERs, ICUs, that's where the respiratory therapists go, and they are always severely understaffed. So you guys are talking my life today. And still, I loved my job.
Yeah. Denise, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for the call. Colin in Kirkland, Washington. Hey, Colin, what's up?
Oh, yes, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to touch base on what a caller just very recently mentioned about the Johns Hopkins pandemic scenario.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually called the Event 201 scenario. So if you Google Event 201, the first couple links that people will find, and I very highly encourage you and everybody else to look at this. The first couple links will get you to a website called the Center for Health Security.org. And reading through some of this, I have to admit it's actually quite disturbing how accurate the details they got the scenario down to. I mean, they even had it down to this novel zoonotic coronavirus starting with bats. And
well, that's because they saw that with SARS.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah.
I mean, this is the exact same scenario as SARS. It's just not as deadly, and it's far more transmissible.
Right. Well, the transmissibility issue they even pointed out in the scenario as well. Again, I would, I hope you and all your listeners read more about this. But in the scenario, I would like to point out that, for people who still hope that this might all be, a 3, 4, 5, or 6 month issue. This scenario, and what I'm reading, they ran the scenario for a year and a half. After a year and a half, they ended the scenario with a global death toll of 65 million. And from what I'm reading, they implied that essentially the pandemic would actually continue at some rate until there was an effective vaccine, or until 80 to 90% of the global population had been exposed. And it's not until after that that this would then finally become an endemic childhood disease. So, again, I highly encourage you and your listeners to read through some of this, and not to be all doom and gloom, but...
Yeah, I wonder if that's how measles started out. When measles first started ripping through the human population, because measles kills adults, not probably in numbers similar to this novel coronavirus, 1% or something like that. Measles can kill adults, but it doesn't generally kill kids. It's an awful disease for kids to have, and it causes miscarriages and malformed babies and things like that. But I wonder when measles first started up, it was like this, and then we developed kind of herd immunity, and then it was only newborns who didn't have that immunity if it wasn't transmitted from mom, and apparently it's not, who were vulnerable. It's interesting. The whole thing of pandemic diseases I find absolutely fascinating. Not to get too morbid on this, but anyhow, Colin, I got to run. But thank you. I wrote down Event 201, and I will Google it or DuckDuckGo it when I get off the air. Thank you, Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Bill, you got to speak up. I can hardly hear you.
Yes, COPD and this virus are basically the same, correct?
Well, no. COPD is the result of damage to your lungs, or there's a bunch of different things that can cause it. Well, smoking's at the top of the list.
The breathing is inhibited, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Diet has a lot to do. Diet has a lot to do with the recovery with the COPD. So I would think that diet has something to do with.
I understand that, Bill, and. Yeah, Bill, I'm going to drop your call, and here's why. Yeah, that may be the case, and my own personal theory is that it's probably the case, and we know that diet and obesity and stuff like that are risk factors for lots and lots of things, but I really don't want anybody calling into the program and offering medical advice, basically, even if it's relatively friendly medical advice. And I'll admit, I've done this myself. I've talked about how Louise and I are double dosing on vitamin C. Well, vitamin C is not going to protect us from the coronavirus. It might keep us healthy. But bottom line is, if you know about something that you think is going to help, share it with your friends, share it with your relatives, but it shouldn't go on the air. I want people to be informed about stuff that is peer-reviewed science. If we're going to talk about science, if we're going to talk about medications or cures or solutions, I've got to see it in a National Institutes of Health publication or some peer-reviewed publication before I'm going to put it on this air. So please don't call in with ideas about ways we can solve this that aren't partisan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And Bill, I hope I didn't offend you. I really appreciate. I know your heart's in the right place, and like I said, I believe that you're onto something, but I just don't want to go down that road anymore. And welcome back. Chuck in Portland, Oregon, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hey, haven't called you in a couple of years, but so I was on hold to discuss Bernie's continuing the thing when a caller called in to talk about the media and Bernie, and I had to kind of disagree with him because he had said that he thinks
I don't
that
think
Bernie
I've taken any media Bernie calls today. Were you watching an old show or something?
No, I was watching the live show on YouTube.
Huh. Okay.
And
he
said that he said that he thought that the media, that Bernie started losing when the media started using the social.
Oh yeah, he made that comment in passing. Yes, I got it.
I was on hold when he made that comment. That's why I was.
Yeah.
So when he made that comment, I was like, I sat there and I thought about it, and most of my friends and associates that are, centrist Democrats and stuff like that, that wasn't what got them to move away from Bernie. Most of them from Bernie when the media started the whole Bernie's too abrasive, Bernie bros are too mean and nasty, who wants to be associated with these mean, ugly, nasty progressives. And most of them they didn't want to distance themselves. They wanted to distance themselves from that. It was kind of like they're almost as bad as Antifa. That was when they moved. So that.
No, and in fact, we saw a sequence of these things. I mean, first it was, oh my God, he's a socialist, and how are we going to pay for Medicare for all, and it's going to bankrupt the country. And then it was, oh my God, he's a communist, he likes Fidel Castro. And then it was, oh my God, he's a grumpy old man. And it just because they would try something and it didn't work, and so they'd try something else and it didn't work, and so they'd try something else. We saw this with Howard Dean. They went after Howard Dean after he said the media should be broken up, and they finally took him down with a Dean scream. This is what we have. We no longer have the fairness doctrine. We no longer and we're living in an era of media consolidation because of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And so media can actually put the opinions of media ownership into editorial, and they do on a regular basis. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. Chuck, thanks for the call. Gail in Vashon Island, Washington. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller. I love your show. I just wanted to relay a story that I heard yesterday that just alarmed me. A friend of mine told me that her sister, who tested positive for the coronavirus, went to a class anyway, a continuing ed class down in Olympia. And, in her defense, she said, well, I sat in the corner. Well, we know how contagious this virus is. And I just think it's unconscionable what she did. And I hung up and I said, well, should I report her? And, all those people in the class, I don't know how many people are in the class, don't know this. And where are they spreading it?
Right, and somebody should let them know, Gail.
Criminal behavior?
I do. I think it's wrong. I mean, we have criminalized that kind of behavior in the past during yellow fever and typhoid epidemics. And by the way, a state senator did this in one of our states. I forget which state, but I read this story this morning. Gail, thanks for the call. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Anthony watching us on YouTube. We got a lot of YouTube watchers calling in today. I guess people are sheltering at home and watching on the internet. Anthony in Detroit, Michigan. What's up?
Hey, Tom, not much. What's going on? I got a couple interesting points, which is that yesterday a worker from one of the Ford plants in Dearborn, he actually passed away because of the COVID. So I don't know how long he had been working there, but the big three shut down all production across North America yesterday. So that's a pretty big deal. Then also the president announced by tweet that they were going to shut down the Canadian border to all non-essential travel, but then the Border Patrol agents had no idea what was non-essential travel. He didn't, I don't know if that's since been announced today, but that was the situation yesterday.
This is what happens when you've got a guy who's in the White House who thinks that the job of the president is to be the reality TV star in chief rather than the person who actually runs the government. He's not running the government. He's just playing a reality show. He thinks he's playing president in a reality show. This is how it works in his brain, and thus we see this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, also last point, I work at a, quote unquote luxurious fancy hotel. And I kind of like the idea you mentioned earlier about making them quarantine zones. I don't think it's a bad idea at all.
Yeah, to use the empty hotels to put people who have tested positive and get them away from their families, not a society, until they don't test positive any longer. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, heck yeah. We're a 130-room hotel, and we only got 4 rooms occupied a night. Yeah, they should do it.
Wow. Yeah. Or alternatively, and I think this is what Governor Cuomo is talking about, is using the hotels to because the staff, the hotels are not really designed to be the ventilation systems, and of course the staff are not trained medical professionals. They're really not designed to deal with something like COVID-19, but they could easily deal with people who are recovering from chemotherapy or people who have a broken leg that is healing. I mean, you've got all these different kinds of people in the hospital for reasons that don't require a lot of specialized equipment, don't require a lot of specialized professionals, although you'd bring those people in from the hospital. And they do need a support infrastructure with people like you who can bring food to the rooms and make sure that things are working. And that way the people who are working there are not exposed to COVID-19. They're instead exposed to people with broken legs, because we're still going to have car accidents, and we're still going to have people falling off roofs. And they shouldn't have to, and if they go to the hospital, they shouldn't be exposed to this. And this is one of the first things, by the way, that the South Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese did, and that I believe the Singaporeans have done, is they have designated certain hospitals as only COVID-19, and other hospitals, all the rest of the hospitals, as no COVID-19 whatsoever. And that way they don't get spread from somebody who's got COVID-19 and they're in a hospital because they need a respirator to somebody who's there because they were in a car accident and they've got a broken leg. And then they get their leg fixed and they go home and they infect their whole family. I mean, our public health system in this country is not a public health system. It's a profit system. It's a money-making system. And it's not. Yeah, it really is. It's not working well.
Drastic measures.
Yep. Thank you very much, Anthony. Good to hear from you. And spot on. Aurelia in Renton, Washington. Hey, Aurelia. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, hi. I know you've been talking a lot about, higher up responsibility and the president with all the, lies he's been telling. But we also have to remember that we have officials working in emergency management in the area. And I know for example, the new King County emergency management was hired because he had been front defense of the anthrax scares in New Jersey. And it's surprising that nothing was set up after that, to protect the civilians in the area. And especially because this is not the first biohazard emergency that we've had in this country. And for example, I find it to be really dastardly that 80,000 N95 masks were thrown away at Bellevue Fire Department, as was given the order by the emergency management head of Bellevue.
Was that because they were out of date?
They were not out of date. They could not find any date on the boxes. They just went ahead because the elastic on the back.
Then why did they throw them away?
Elastic.
That doesn't make any sense. Why did they throw them away?
Because they needed space in the basement of the fire department for whatever. So the thing is not only throwing them away, but not getting any more back. And this happened throughout the county, that everything that had been bought in the past started to be thrown away because the elastics were gone bad.
Yeah. Well, that's where they go out of date, because if you got a bad elastic, you don't want your mask, the elastic cracking and the mask popping off your face.
No, but now you have hospitals like Mercy trying to put together makeshift masks, which
with stuff from Michael's Craft Supplies. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Right. So they should have. When you get rid of something that is so sensitive, you have to replace it. Otherwise, you're not worth having a job that's called emergency management.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Aurelia. Mindy, watching YouTube in Kansas City. Mindy, we have 1 minute. What's up?
Hello from the soggy Midwest. Well, I just wanted to comment on your earlier about what people do to, kind of keep their spirits up. Right now would be a great time to develop a hobby if you've been wanting to explore hobbies. My husband does blacksmithing. I do crochet. To alleviate fears, panics, or whatever, go take a walk out in nature. Send funny memes to your family, to check on people. My mom is 80 years old, lives with her 2 dogs. Daily, I've started sending her just really crackpot funny memes. If you have a family Facebook page, post up funny stuff or positive stuff. Just simple things like that. I think will help spread the love around, just for our own psyches too, but also for everybody else. So,
yeah. Great stuff, Mindy. Great stuff. And you're watching us on YouTube right now. YouTube has a zillion videos on how to do these things. If you want to learn how to crochet, go to YouTube. You want to learn how to do yoga or meditate, go to YouTube. Check it out. Mindy, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thanks again for watching us. We'll be right back. And I want to get into how is Korea getting through this? South Korea. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war. How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred. How to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to the second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. Austerity and to deconstruct government, to stop Democrats from using government for positive ends or paying off its growing coalition with new entitlements. The book R.I.P. GOP.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to talk about South Korea. There's a great report from Reuters. It's by Chad Terhune, Terhune, and you can find it over at Reuters.com. It's titled Special Report, How Korea Trounced U.S. in Race to Test People for Coronavirus. And what he points out, and I think it's probably one of the most important points in the entire thing, is that the United States, whose first case was detected the same day as South Korea's, the same day, is not even close to meeting demand for testing. About 60,000 tests have been run by public and private labs in a country of 330 million. But in late January, this is when, word was coming out of China that this virus was happening and that it was a huge problem in Wuhan and Hubei province. And in December, and now we know that it actually erupted in November, and that this doctor who had sounded the signal got hassled by the Chinese government, and in their attempt to cover this up, it got out of control, shall we say, at the very least. That's a government failure there of China, but they then responded in a very vigorous way once it did get out of control. But it also got out of China. And, we live in a world where people fly constantly. Obviously the numbers are much smaller now than they were just a month ago, but people fly constantly. So in South Korea, when they started seeing these numbers, now South Korea shares a border with China, they were like, okay, we got to do something about this. So I'm not sure how much of South Korea shares a border. It may be that it's only North Korea that shares a border, but because South Korea is a peninsula, but whatever. I don't have a map in front of me, but here's the article. This is Chad Terhune in Reuters. In late January, South Korean health officials summoned representatives from more than 20 medical companies. Now keep in mind, this is January. From 20 medical companies from their Lunar New Year celebrations to a conference room tucked inside Seoul's busy train station. One of the country's top infectious disease officials delivered an urgent message. South Korea needs an effective test now to detect this coronavirus that's running rampant in China, because it will come here. And we need to be able to catch it. There were only 4 known cases at that point in South Korea, but they were very worried. Now, keep in mind, this is after cases were already detected in the United States and South Korea. 1 case in the United States, 1 case in South Korea on the same day. A week later, or a few days later, they've got 4 cases in South Korea, and they're getting together with 20 different medical companies. We acted like an army, said Lee Sang-won, an infectious disease expert at Korea's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A week after that January 27th meeting, South Korea's CDC approved one company's diagnostic test. Another company soon followed. By the end of February, South Korea was making headlines around the world for its drive-through screening centers and ability to test thousands of people daily. 7 weeks after that train station meeting, the Koreans have tested well over 290,000 people and identified over 8,000 infections. New cases are falling off. Now, keep in mind, this article was published, I believe, day before yesterday. New cases are falling off. It was yesterday. 93 were reported Wednesday, down from a daily peak of 909 2 weeks earlier. So South Korea was experiencing 909 new cases a day, and by widespread testing, they got that down to yesterday a total of 93 cases. Nationwide. Now, obviously, South Korea is a smaller country than the United States, but nationwide. Now, the article goes into considerable depth about the CDC and the FDA greenlighting the CDC test kit, and then the CDC test kit didn't work, and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, on January 30th, only days after the Seoul train station meeting, the U.S. Department of HHS declared the novel coronavirus a public health emergency, citing a similar pronouncement from the WHO, and then the CDC tried to develop their own test. Now, let me add, and I've been saying from the beginning, the World Health Organization had the tests being created in South Korea were based on, and you can read the article in Reuters if you want. It's all, this is all over in multiple articles all over the place. These tests were based on a standard for these tests that was published by the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization had authorized labs around the world to make these tests. And they were shipping them in January, or perhaps in February. I don't have that right in front of me, but they were shipping them quite some time ago. The United States, the World Health Organization, and if you go over to Snopes, you'll find one side of the story. If you go to Politico, you'll find the other side of the story. The Politico article talks about how, I thought I had it here, but apparently I don't. The Politico article talks about how we chose not to take the CDC tests when they were already shipping them to 60 different countries. Well, and then the Snopes thing says, well, we're going to fact check that. It turns out that it wasn't that the United States decided not to take the test kits. It was that the World Health Organization never offered them to us. Well, the World Health Organization only offers test kits. This is subsidized test kits, right? They only offer them to poor countries. But any country that has the means to buy them could simply call the World Health Organization and say, we'd like some of these. Or for that matter, they don't even need to go through the WHO. They can go to the manufacturers. There's a German company that manufactures most of them, but they've licensed manufacturers in a couple of other countries as well. So Snopes is saying, well, it's not true that the WHO offered the test kits to America and America turned them down. WHO doesn't routinely offer test kits to America on anything because we're an advanced country. Yeah, that's right. But the other side of the story, which the Politico article points out, which is also true, is that if the United States, as soon as the CDC learned in early February that their test kit was not working right, and by the way, it takes 4 days because you got to ship the samples to Atlanta and wait for the results to come back. As soon as they figured that out, they could have gone to the World Health Organization, to WHO, to who? And or any of these foreign manufacturers and simply started buying them. We could have been testing people using WHO test kits. There was no impediment to that. It's not like the WHO said, no, you can't have them. What they said is, we're not going to give them to you for free. We're not even going to offer them to you for free because it's never happened before. Well, that makes sense. But Trump could have, the Trump administration could have easily said to any of these manufacturers of WHO-certified test kits, hey, we'd like to buy some of those. Now, they were asked about this at their press conference yesterday, and one of the people said, well, there were too many negative tests, and that's why we chose not to buy them. That was a lie. And then today, and like I said, South Korea is down to 90 new cases a day. And then today, Trump was asked, why is your administration not preparing itself for the crisis by ramping up production of test kits? And Trump turned to the reporter and said, the only thing we weren't prepared for was the media. The media has not treated us fairly. And Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, who was in the room, says this is a really disturbing display from the podium, one in keeping with the president's view of and statements about the press for 3 years, but taking place during a pandemic. He talks about how poorly he feels he's been treated. To recap, 3 major broadsheets, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, which have been reporting on the extensive failures of his administration in dealing with the coronavirus, are dishonest. I mean, this is where we're at. Other countries are getting this thing under control. We have it burning through us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you still can't get tested in most parts of the United States, in the vast majority of the United States. And even where you can, you've got to jump through all kinds of hoops and meet certain criteria. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. I want to try and, the type is really small, trying to catch people. Who's been on hold the longest here? Karen in Marysville, Washington. Hey, Karen. Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hi, Tom.
What's on your mind today? Hi.
Schools, public schools.
Okay.
is on my mind. I work in Marysville, and I watched the coronavirus hit Kirkland, and they immediately closed the schools down, and people are learning from home with their technology, and teachers are all over it. It rolls up past my school. We finally close our schools. But we had a Zoom conference yesterday with some other teachers, and they were from, I am. They were from Lake Stevens, or basically Snohomish County school teachers. And there were about 17 of us on this Zoom. And they were talking about how they could reach out to the students and what they could set up and small groups. And one gal said she can't answer an individual question or do an individual conference with a student because that's inequitable. The emails I've been getting from my district are saying, don't hurry up and get all these online plans for your kids because there may be legal ramifications and wait and see. Well, I'm in a district, and then so that got me thinking about Betsy DeVos and Puerto Rico, and I'm like, okay, how is this going to play out? So, because some kids have computers at home and some don't. Some have parents at home, some don't. And the inequity between this technology, you have Title I schools and all that. So then I found online an article that came out with the testing that's been waived. And that's one relief to schools. The rest of it, they said, in addition to the possibility, I'm reading from a report from the 12th, said in addition to the possibility of waiving test requirements, the Education Department may consider a targeted waiver for schools that don't meet the minimum student participation rate of 95% in state tests. So that got me thinking, okay, well, that means that Title I schools and kids with the absentees, and they if you have kids that can't participate in the testing, then you're waived from the testing. So school districts that have money and are all plugged in
is
and
Title
online.
I the part that covers kids with disabilities?
Title I, yes, that's part of it. It's kids with disabilities, kids with lower academic growth, poverty. It has a whole bunch of different things. I'm in a 65% poverty school, so with 17 different, anyway, this much stuff. But so we're basically told our hands are tied.
Karen.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on what we can do to keep teaching kids equitably and with keeping teachers working.
I think what the school districts should be doing with what little budgets they have, and the state should be augmenting it, should be equalizing everybody's access to technology. Kids who don't have iPads or their equivalent or laptops or their equivalent should be given them, and kids who don't have access to the internet, it should be purchased and made available to them.
But school districts don't have the money.
Oh, I know that. That's why I said the state should be subsidizing it. And frankly, I think the federal government needs to be subsidizing it all right now. I don't think we're talking about mind-boggling amounts of money here. That's what I would do. Karen, thank you. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ron in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about what happened to the Family First bill over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
This
is the legislation out of the House?
Yeah. The House passed the bill on Friday, and I was like, great. This is going to be wonderful relief for those of us who are being affected by the COVID-19 outbreak. I looked at the bill online, read through it, read the tweets by the various representatives. Technical corrections. The paragraphs needed to be renumbered. That's code language. The lawyers are working on it in the back room, I'm sure. Lo and behold, when I pull up the version that got adopted by the Senate with all the technical corrections, let me tell you what changed. The emergency paid leave that was supposed to be 3 months, that you're supposed to get directly from the government if you were affected by COVID-19, like taking care of a relative, or you were ill, or you were quarantined, or your child was at home. Now, 10 weeks, only one reason to get it, caring for a child that's at home because the school or daycare is closed. Does that sound like a technical revision to you?
Well, it does if you're a Republican. I mean, what you're talking, if this is what passed out of the Senate and you're comparing it with what passed to the House, if they're different bills right now, then it's going to have to go to a conference committee. Or you're saying that Nancy Pelosi did this in her negotiations with Steve Mnuchin. One of the things that really troubles me is that it's being reported now that Donald Trump will not talk to Nancy Pelosi, period, at all. He's not talking to foreign governments. He's just doing his daily reality show on TV and pretending to be a president. And so the result is that Nancy Pelosi had to negotiate this entire thing with Steve Mnuchin, who's, it was probably a good idea because he's a little smarter than Trump. He was smart enough to rip off thousands of Californians and steal their monies and throw them out of their homes back when he was, running One West Bank. He's a slick character. But basically, they would negotiate something. He would take it back to the Trump administration, the Republicans, and they'd say, oh, no, you can't do that. And he'd come back. And Pelosi had to walk back stuff over and over and over again to get something that could be passed by the Republicans. Yeah, I know. And I think that what's going to happen... Go ahead.
Didn't see the corrected text from the House until Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
And they got their first version of the text of what passed in the House.
No, I got it. You already said that, Ron. Thank you. I get it. And I'm as pissed off about it as you are. And the fact that every single Republican yesterday voted to say no to Patty Murray's amendment that would have given people 2 weeks of paid sick time and 14 weeks of family leave. I mean, that's like nothing compared to any other country in the world. And every single Republican in the United States Senate voted no, including Mitt Romney, all of them. I mean, this is how insane the Republican Party is. And that's what Nancy Pelosi is having to negotiate with. And so, I'm not willing to criticize the Democrats or the Democratic leadership on this. They are dealing with crazy people who are owned by crazy right-wing billionaires who do not want anything going to the average person that might cause their billionaire taxes to go up. That's the bottom line. That's what's going on here. And that's what's going to continue to go on here. at least until these guys are scared bleepless. And I think that that day may be coming soon. Rhiannon in Oakland, California, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Rhiannon, what's up?
Hi, it's Rhiannon. Thanks for taking my call.
Rhiannon, my apologies.
No worries. Thank you for taking my call. So I'm 42. I lived through 9/11, and they sent us to war with lies from that emergency situation. In the recession caused by the banking industry and the Wall Street and the housing market bubble, they took our homes, and then they turned around and bailed those companies out to buy buybacks, and then also to give their CEOs bonuses. Now they're trying to save a dying industry, the fossil fuel industry, with a bailout. There are already subsidies for these companies, for these industries, pardon me. And
$300 billion a year here in the U.S. alone.
Exactly. In addition, they also pollute our water, air, and everything else. Instead of trying to resurrect a dying industry, how about we stimulate the Green New Deal? So not only will it create good-paying jobs, but it also will clean our air and water. So God forbid, if we need to go grow our own food in this time of need, our soil is actually clean and our water is actually clean. It wasn't necessarily a question. It was just a comment, and just wanted to point it out. Thank you, and
I'm totally with you.
Have a great day.
Okay, thanks, Brianna. You said it very well, and yeah, spot on. Thank you. Sari in Eureka, California, listening on KGO. What's up, Sari?
Oh, thank you. Yes, and you got my name right. Thanks so much. So I just wanted to chime in. I'm the mother of a 5-year-old boy, and I think that our children are all watching how we handle this, and we need to stay calm and positive for their sake. We had an earthquake up here yesterday, and that prompted a learning moment for my son and I. He was really scared, and I explained what it was, and I explained how they happened. And then we went around the whole house and figured out a safe place to be for in each room. If an earthquake happened and where he should go and where he should stand. And then he packed an emergency kit. And I just think that we just need to be calm and positive and frame this in language that, is age appropriate. And our kids are going to look back and remember how they felt when this was all going on.
I agree. This generation, it's fascinating. I mean, if you read like The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe, each generation is shaped by their experiences. The Great Depression really formed a generation, and this event is going to really form a generation. I have a 2-year-old grandson, and he's going to grow up in a completely different world than the one I did. Sari, thank you.
You're
Thank you for
listening
that.
to the Thom Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And it's so important, especially as we're sheltering in place, those of us who can do it, and we're learning how to be really nice to our spouses, that we be really supportive and nurturing of our kids and the young ones around us.
Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, what's the truth on coronavirus testing? And why has Trump refused to accept the World Health Organization test that the entire rest of the planet is using? Melinda St. Louis is here on how the insurer's conduct is outrageous on the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Weissman joins in on how Public Citizen and 70 organizations are calling on Trump to prevent Big Pharma from profiteering on coronavirus. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is also here about the ongoing Fukushima disaster. And in Geeky Science, find out what happens if you walk just 30 minutes a day. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And actually, I moved my computer over here a little bit, and I can see everybody better. David in Canterbury, Connecticut. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for your help and all your information, and thank you for the Commons phoning in and giving all their information. Very quickly, I'll make a point, Tom, to you. The other night when the debate started, Bernie started the debate by saying that one of our biggest priorities was to shut this president up. And I started thinking right away, being a retired union organizer, how can I act? What can I do to act in solidarity with other union members? And I came up with a great idea. I phoned a guy today who's a past president of Teamsters Local, told him about Free Speech TV, and we talked back and forth until he was able to access it. He finally got it. He said, Dave, I'm watching it. I said, wonderful. I said, good luck. And it made me so happy, Tom, because people like this have credibility with other workers, and he's going to carry that message forward, Tom. And one by one, didactically, we're going to shut this guy up. And I just want to get that message out there, Tom. Made me happy.
Thank you, David, and thank you. Yeah, and let me add, this program and a whole lineup of progressive programs are available on Sirius XM on their Progress channel. I believe it's 127. We're available on some radio stations around the country. You can check the websites of various shows because it varies from show to show. We're available on YouTube. We're running our show live on YouTube, and many of these other shows also do on Facebook Live, on Twitter Live. Now we just started that a few weeks ago. And on Free Speech TV, as Dave said. All that stuff is easy to find, and as long as we can, we're going to continue keeping this show here. And as far as I know, barring, if I can stay well, we're in good shape. Or particularly me and Sean and Joyce and Louise and. Yeah, we are a team effort here. Richard in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, and Nate, yes, and Nate. Sorry, Nate. Richard in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. What I wanted to talk about was I was watching a thing on. Sure, Italy has a bunch of people that has a high rate, but they have more hospital beds, they have more ventilators, and they have a different health system than we do. And it seems to me that their health system is better than ours. And ours, ours is like we pay the most, but we're not getting the best treatment. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. We pay about twice as much as Italy does, and they have more hospital beds and more ventilators, and still their system is crashing. Somebody asked Trump about that the other day, and he said, they got somebody said, isn't this time for Medicare for all? And Trump was like, they have Medicare for all in Italy, and it's sure not helping them. That's BS. I mean, it's just, spot on, Richard. Well said. Thank you. Paul in Chicago. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good.
I believe this is the fourth week of the Trump slump.
Yeah.
If you want to deal with messaging, that's a really not catchy phrase. The Trump slump.
The Dow is actually up 400 points right now. So, but this happens, right? If you look at what happened in 1929 through 1930, it would go down for a couple of days, it'd go up. It'd go down for a couple of days, it'd go up. That's how markets move.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I want to talk about is if anyone's been paying attention the last couple of years with all the natural disasters we've been having, it becomes really clear that our priorities really now and our biggest threats to our society is viruses, obviously, now, and the environmental impact. And we have to have a paradigm shift away from the military to the two items that I just mentioned. You can't fight a virus with an F-16, for example. So we got a lot of goofy equipment out there that's really serving no purpose. And particularly globally, when countries rely on each other more and more, there's really, I think, a less chance of big wars and folks fighting because you rely on each other.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for interdependence, and I agree with that philosophy, broadly speaking, and that's what drove the European Union, and that's what drove the individual states to abandon the Articles of Confederacy, which was basically 13 little countries with a free trade agreement between them, and replace it with the U.S. Constitution and become one country. I agree with all that, and at the same time, the other lesson that we're learning from this is that you have to have a manufacturing base, a domestic manufacturing base. Whether you do it with tariffs, whether you do it with incentives, whether you do it with limits or prohibitions on sale or purchase of particular products, you have to have a domestic manufacturing base if your country is going to survive any kind of shock. And this is, probably one of the biggest shocks, certainly the biggest shock that this country has sustained since 1918. But I think your point is well taken, Paul. Thanks a lot for the call. Philip in Boston. Hey, Philip, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to kind of check in. My wife is a nurse practitioner at MGH at Mass General and in the respiratory acute care unit. So our life has gotten
right on the front lines.
Interesting. Yeah, right on the front lines. And one thing is, I heard you say that they're out of masks in MGH, and that she says that they have plenty. So that's a little good piece of news.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so I don't know
if you're talking about Mass General, because what the person that I heard this morning on Poppy Harlow's show on CNN, I'm quite sure it was from Mass General, and she said that they were out or they were near to running out of masks, but apparently that was wrong.
No, I'm just reporting what I heard, because I heard you say that, and then I texted my wife. She said, "No, we're okay." So hopefully that's yeah. But so I'm self-employed, and she works there, and we have 2-year-old twins, and so we've got childcare issues and all sorts of things that are happening. But actually, one cool thing is that medical students in Boston are volunteering because they can't go to class, so they're volunteering to do childcare for people who are working in the hospitals and stuff for free.
Oh, isn't that great?
So there's a lot of good stuff, people coming together and stuff, which is always good to see in a kind of crisis situation.
Yeah.
But
I would think, depending on where they are in their training, the people who are at least in their last year of training, whether it's being a PA or an RN or an NP or an MD for that matter, might be recruited to help out as more and more of these frontline physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, et cetera, start.
Yeah, and we're trying to figure out what to do if she gets sick. We don't know what we're going to do. Because so we're just keeping our fingers crossed.
Well, that's where every hospital. I mean, this is hospitals need to be planning for this, because this will happen. This does burn through hospitals. And they need to be negotiating with nearby, something, hotels or something, to house their people who are on self-quarantine. And the best kind of hotels to do that are the old motels where the entrance to each room is right on the street or right on the parking lot. And so that you're not sharing a common corridor, you're not sharing common doors. Food can be brought to the door and left outside. That's what they did in Kirkland, Washington. The city or the county bought one of those old Motel 8 kind of places. And if the hospital in Boston is not seriously looking at doing that right now, they're missing a bet. That's something that they should be doing. Learn from what happened out here on the West Coast.
Yeah, those kind of motels don't generally tend to be in the city, but I don't know. That is a great idea, though.
Yeah. Sometimes you can find the old ones. I mean, they still have. I stayed at one, or I did a gig at one in Los Angeles just a couple of months ago. It was one of those old motels downtown. I mean, it's got a little courtyard in the middle, but you walk around inside. In fact, it's where Greg Palast and I gave a speech. You walk around inside, and then the entrance to the rooms are right on a common,
well, I'm gonna look into that.
Portico or whatever. Yeah. Okay, Philip, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Carl in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Carl, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I feel almost guilty talking politics in the middle of this national threat we're facing, but I'm an 82-year-old retired emergency management coordinator for the city and county of San Diego, and we'll get through this. I know that. But I had one proposal and one thing I wanted to ask what you thought about, and it's kind of on the political side. I have no doubts in my mind anywhere that any Democratic candidate is going to replace this idiot currently in the Oval Office. What I'm thinking is, and I'm developing a proposal to send to Tom Press at the Democratic Party, is that somebody develop an actual focused, developed campaign to work on to develop facts regarding every aspect of Trump's administration response to this whole issue we're now facing, and use that not necessarily to get rid of him. I think it's a known deal. He's going to be gone. But what I'm thinking of is we need to retake the Senate. The biggest problem is Trump, yes, but an even bigger problem is those Republicans who are either so frightened or who are just generally bad people.
They're in the pockets of the right-wing billionaires is what's going on, Carl. Did you see, by the way, where Mitch McConnell is complaining that Amy McGrath is running ads on national television?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it's insane. He's like, that's not fair. This is a crisis. When he's got two super PACs, multi-million-dollar super PACs in Kentucky running ads against Amy McGrath. It's crazy. But I agree with you, Carl. There's going to be books written about this, not just studies. There's going to be books written about the incompetence of this administration as a lesson.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is one huge cautionary tale. We'll be back. Stick around. And welcome back. Jim in Patchogue, New York. How do you say
hi, Tom. We've spoken before. One of my friends called me last night to thank me for referring your show to him, and he's very happy. He says most of your information is very accurate, and I was happy to have shared that with him. But I'm going into surgery tomorrow for, believe it or not, reversal of the Hartmann's procedure. And I've been through the mill with this. Yeah, it's when you have Hartmann's procedure is when you have a colon sectioning, and you have an ostomy as a result. So I've been waiting 5 months for this since the surgery happened, and it just so happens
get your normal functions back.
Yeah, I'm going to be a whole person again. I had lung cancer last year, and I've been through the mill. And with all this, with the doctors and everything, I had to switch hospitals at the last minute because one was closed because of the corona, and a private hospital picked me up at the last second. I'm getting right in under the wire. Saturday, they're not allowing any elective surgeries. And the way that was defined to me, this elective surgery business, is if you walk in through the front door, that's elective. If you walk in horizontally or come in horizontally through the emergency, then it's an emergency surgery. But anything elective, they're not going to handle. And so yesterday at the last minute, at the 11th hour, the surgeon called me, and he was squeamish about going into a hospital that had this coronavirus. And I said, look, I am not afraid of a coronavirus. And let's just go with it, because I don't want to wait 2 more months to get this surgery. I'm at my wit's end with it now, But anyway, I had a quick story, if you got a second. I read this when I was a young man about a reverse Santa Claus, where an executive had his job taken away. He was a typical American, had it overweight. Kids were overweight, drinking the sodas and all that. So it was the reverse Santa Claus, where everything was taken away from him. And now he had to fend for himself. So he did this by growing a garden in the backyard, growing his own food, doing things around the house. And as a result of it, Christmas came and went and came. And what happened was he was now a new person. He was his health was so much improved by taking care of himself. He got in touch with his family again. So there was a positive effect out of this. And I thought of this coronavirus situation where everybody's got sent home and can't go to work. And I said, wow, this is very similar to the short story that I read years ago, how people are going to have to
learn things out of this, Jim.
Yes.
We will definitely learn things out of this. But, let me echo your surgeon's caution that, this is starting to float around in hospitals, and if you get it, you may not survive it. And that's worse than being stuck with an ostomy bag.
I agree with you there, but I'm a tough cookie. I've had many, many years of good health. I just ran into a wall last year.
Yeah, but I would seriously, I would listen to my doctor's advice. But we all have to make our own decisions and our own personal and medical decisions and things like that. But if you're over 40 years old, if you look at the incidence of fatality, it starts going up rapidly after 40, and the incidence of hospitalization starts going up rapidly after 30. That's not good stuff. But Jim, good luck. I wish you the best, and thanks for the call. And yes, we will get through this, and there will be a lot of learning from it. And I think it's going to be, 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, that was the beginning of a new America. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Randy in Gardnerville, Nevada. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It seems to me if this goes on and millions of people lose their jobs, that this is an ideal time to bring up the Civilian Conservation Corps, a la FDR. And maybe you could tell us why we can't get this on. It just seems so logical.
Well, that's essentially what the Green New Deal is. It's rebooting many of the New Deal programs, and the reason we can't do it right now is A, the Republicans control the Senate, and you got a Republican in the White House, and a cranky one at that, and B, people can't go to work. I mean, the WPA, the CCC, the RTA, all those programs were about providing work to people who were unemployed. Now we got people who are unemployed because they're hiding from the virus at home. Basically, they're sheltering in place. So first, we've got to get through this, and it's starting to turn Republicans into Democratic socialists. A few of them, anyway. We'll see. We'll see how quickly that happens. But then afterwards, yes, I think in a year and a half, 2 years, we will have a certain amount of herd immunity. We will have, in all probability, a vaccine and a number of drugs that actually work against this novel coronavirus. Trump was on TV talking today about I can't remember the name of it, but it's a quin something, or it's a quinine-based drug that's used against malaria. And he says we seem to be getting some good results on that. I've seen some of those studies, published in the journals, and yeah, it seems to have some small percentage of help, but this is no silver bullet at all. But there are some specific antiviral drugs that have been developed, remdesivir or whatever it is by Gilead, that looks real promising. But that's going to be a year down the road. They've got to do safety testing, and then they've got to do, and it's the same thing with the vaccines. Remember Epstein-Barr virus, where people were getting, this was back during the Clinton administration, as I recall, they rushed a flu virus to market because there was a new flu coming and they were afraid it would be pandemic. And people were getting this neurological disease where they'd end up paralyzed because the virus hadn't, or the vaccine had not gone through a long enough period of safety testing. You've got to give it to a lot of people before because if you got something that only affects 1/100th or 1/10 of the population in an adverse way, you've got to test it on tens of thousands of people over a period of time to find out. And that's why it takes a year and a half to roll out a new vaccine now. So we don't want to, have vaccines that are going to be causing problems, and not necessarily solving problems. So it's going to be a while. But once we get on the other side of this, I think that there's going to be an extraordinary opportunity for this country to rebound, and countries all around the world. We're going to see something it's going to be like the Renaissance after the Black Plague in Europe. The Black Plague killed off a third of Europe, and obviously this isn't going to kill off a third of us, but it has knocked us out of the workplace as it is right now, probably a third of us. And afterwards, the pent-up demand just came back, roaring back, and that led to an increase in wages and all kinds of new jobs. And that was Europe's first middle class. in history. It was in, as I recall, like the 1430s or thereabouts. And people had enough time to do music and write and science and math. And there was this just explosion of creativity, which set the stage for the Enlightenment, 100 years later. So, Randy, I got to run, but thank you. That's a great suggestion. A good one. Thank you very much. Let's see, Leslie in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Just want to say God bless you and your staff, and to piggyback the previous gentleman's comments about people being out of work. I'm in Springfield, Missouri, where we have at least 2 confirmed cases. Streets are quieter. The skies have gone silent. I had been contract working, and I'm currently searching for work. My thought was, we have Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Republican senator, saying to give us any kind of help would be incentivizing laziness, which irks me to no end. But I'm willing to work. I don't have children. I'm willing to die to, if they could create some kind of manufacturing of these ventilators, or I'm going to an orientation at our career center Tuesday. I called to sign up for it. They limit to 10. I got in. Hopefully there's something out there, but I'm fully willing to work and put my life on the line. But I mean, where are we going from here when there's a span of possibly 18 months of getting through this track?
Well, this is why I'm saying, and I started saying this yesterday, that we need a 10 to 15 trillion dollar bailout, basically, of the American people, not of American industry. And American industry needs to just like freeze in amber for a while, and the American people need to be supported. And we've got a $20 trillion.
Well, half of us are.
Yeah, absolutely. About $4 trillion of that is government spending, which means we've got around a $16 trillion economy. I think you can safely shave, 5, 6, 7 trillion off of that. That is money that's going to corporations and fat cats, and that leaves probably $6 or $7 trillion a year that is going to salaries. And I'm just doing this back of the envelope math here. The real numbers are out there someplace. And whatever that is,
the problem is the inept administration.
Half of that needs to be replaced. Yeah, but probably about half of that needs to be replaced, and that's where we go. Leslie, good luck, and thanks for watching us on Facebook. Peter, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Peter, we have a minute left. What's up? A little less than.
Yes, sir. Last night we had our first person die in the state from the coronavirus. The governor, Einhoff, and Langford all ignored this problem, but it didn't wake the people up until they hit them in a pocketbook. Goodyear Tire Company is the largest tire factory in the world, closed down today. Now the streets, the street, everybody's there as usual in the stores shopping. So now it's
that's because they're all watching Fox News and listening to Right Wing Hate Radio, and they think that this is just like the flu. It's really unfortunate. Peter, thank you for the call. Keep yourself safe there in Lawton, Oklahoma. And thanks again for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, and your friends and neighbors and relatives need you, and you need to reach out to them. Be nice to somebody today. Find a way. And get out in nature. Go out and take a walk if you possibly can. Social distance yourself, but be good to yourself. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thank you. An eviction moratorium is not enough. The 19,000 and counting undersigners to this petition demand a rent freeze during the state of emergency caused by COVID-19. The loss of work is forcing us to face our dreadful overpriced healthcare system. The loss of work and these extra expenses will only add up during the pandemic. The eviction moratorium that allows evictions to continue based on rent unpaid during the pandemic is of no use to the people of Portland. The people of Portland, the United States, and the world are bracing against the impact of COVID-19 on our lives. In the wake of a slowing economy and an attempt to responsibly contain the spread of the virus, landlords and mortgage holders need to respond to the pandemic in kind, by bracing for change and not endangering the people by forcing them to work, or by forcing them onto the street as soon as it looks like the virus is abating. Neither the virus nor the housing crisis will disappear at the end of the month, or in 3 months, or in 6 months. Freezing rent until the economy can safely recover is the only way to keep thousands more Portlanders off the streets. San Diego and the state of Texas are already considering similar measures. Local organizations supporting the measure include the International League of People Struggle, Migrante Portland, PEACHER, All African People's Revolutionary Party, FRSO, and Red Rainbow PDX. An eviction moratorium is good in that it will keep people in their homes during the peak of the pandemic. But if they're thrown out right after, or 3 months, or 6 months after, they will still be in danger, and the economy of Portland will still limp along as it attempts to recover from the virus.
Thank you.
Flatten the curve! Freeze the rent! Flatten the curve! Freeze...